policy is crystal clear. From this point, any country that formally makes a demand for reparations from this country, a reformed government, if we win the next general election, will immediately halt visa issuances to that country. And we've already made clear that we would end foreign aid too. Britain was the first major power to prohibit slavery, and it cost Britain thousands of sailors. Britain spent the equivalent, modern equivalent of billions of pounds on enforcing that slave trade, the prohibition on slavery. So I think Britain actually deserves a lot of credit for that.
I understand that your parents immigrated to...
So, this week, a UK political party proposed visa bans, not on criminals, not on security threats, on countries asking for reparations for slavery. Let's talk about what that actually means. So welcome to This Week in Africa, your weekly live stream where we talk about all things Africa news and the importance of those stories to us. In those This Week in Africa for sorry, there's some delay with the platform. Welcome to This Week in Africa, your weekly live stream. We talk about all things Africa and everything pertaining to the news on the continent and how it impacts those living in the diaspora and on the continent. Before we get into today's stories, let's do some quick introductions and then we'll get right into it. I'll turn it over to Gloria for her introduction.
Hi, my name is Gloria Ayo. I am founder of Diaspora Station, and what we do there is basically do our best to bridge the gap between Africa and its diaspora through history, culture, current affairs, etc. So yeah, that's what we do, and I'm happy to be back on This Week in Africa with the Joe Otago.
All right. And I'm Joe Hatagwa, the founder of Authentic African Media. Our goal is to help people visit, move, and invest in Africa. We also share stories from the continent every week. So you're aware of what's happening in the places that you might be looking to visit, move, or invest in. As I mentioned today, the headline story is UK party seeking a visa ban on African countries and also Caribbean countries seeking slavery reparations. We're also going to talk about the insurgent unaliving of an army general in Nigeria. The fact that the US military and drones are there and this still happened begs a lot of questions. We'll also get into Burkina Faso recording significant declines in terror-related unalivings. So some work happening there in Burkina Faso to keep you guys updated on. And then also we're going to talk about the French eyeing Botswana for uranium after they were kicked out of Niger. Next, another story from France on the continent of Africa as Kenya becomes a new military hub, continuing their attempts to move to new places for military and uranium. Last, China's surveillance grip expands across Africa with what they call safe city systems. So before we get into the rest of the stories, we want to first focus on the UK party seeking to ban African countries seeking slavery reparations. So as I mentioned earlier, and as you saw, there was a gentleman from a major political party there in the UK. He is from the quote unquote Reform UK party. And he's proposing denying visas to countries seeking slavery reparations. So the proposal was led by Nigel Farage's party. So he's former leader of the country or a former leader within the country. And it's basically could impact nations across Africa and the Caribbean, obviously including Ghana, Nigeria, Jamaica, and Barbados. Then this comes shortly after the United Nations General Assembly, as you guys might remember, adopted a resolution calling the transatlantic slave trade the gravest crime against humanity. You might remember that the UK abstained from that vote. Now, that's a different party that's in power that abstained from that vote. This gentleman and Nigel Farage are arguing that the UK should have voted no, and because of the requirements for potential reparations. So we're going to play a video which gives a little bit more insight to this, and then we'll have some commentary on the other side.
And a new proposal in the UK threatens travel plans of Africans across the continent. as the British Reform UK Party has proposed to deny new visas to countries seeking slavery reparations. The party, led by Nigel Farage, says the ban would cover any country making such demands. It added that the restrictions will cover all types of visas, be it for work, tourism, or immigration. Historically, Britain transported an estimated 3 million Africans across the Atlantic before abolishing the slave trade in the early 19th century. And the Reform UK's policy proposal timing is crucial. It comes weeks after the United Nations General Assembly backed a resolution that declared the transatlantic slave trade the gravest crime against humanity.
All right, we'll leave it there. So, Gloria, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this particular proposal and what it means if Nigel Farage's UK party comes to power or is able to get this passed through the parliament in the UK, because they don't actually have to be in power for this to be passed.
So, of course, when this was approved, when this became news, we told people, well, maybe silently, but in my head, it's look at the countries that are choosing to side with you, as it were, because that's essentially what it is. Justice is the first step to healing. And you look at the countries that abstained, look at the countries that voted yes, look at the countries that voted no. And I'm speaking with regard to Ghana's push recently at the United Nations for slavery to be considered one of the gravest crimes in history. So it's very important that you note those countries, because now you see as much as some of our leaders in power now throughout the world, as much as it's really hurtful what they're doing to people economically, socially, etc. If we could take an advantage from it, it would be that now we've seen people for who they are. Now people are far more brazen to come out with rhetorics that would have been, you would have been canceled, you would have been shut down, maybe as far back as perhaps a decade ago. And for that to now become the conversations we're having, like it's nothing. Like, how is this not even major news globally? How are people not in the streets? Do you get what I'm saying? That I'm just saying, as of maybe a decade ago, that would have been the kind of reaction you would have gotten. So now to come from an angle to be suggesting that the UK should not be pressured into paying billions in compensation for historical acts that were legal, according to them, under international law at the time they occurred, that's basically where you're coming from. It's, again, you basically trying to wash your hands from something that was done to a group of people, a scattering or scatterings that have actually affected people and are still affecting them systematically today. Had you compensated them, and I'm not just even talking financially, had you adequately compensated them, perhaps we won't need to keep revisiting it as heavily as we have. You don't dismiss what happened in Germany. Why do you keep dismissing things that happened to a group of Black people? And to think that Nigel himself is a son of an immigrant.
Well, not Nigel, is the other guy. Nigel is the head of the party. This other guy who was speaking is his name is I can't remember his name, but he's a son of I think Pakistani or South Asian descent. I'll get the information, but yeah.
Yeah, but to think that the party leader Nigel could actually be part of those spearheading this is just very ironic. And at the end of the day, it's just, again, the conversation we've always had, how our people keep getting dismissed when it comes to issues that are critical. At the very least, be sober. At the very least, apologize, even though that's not enough. But to keep coming from positions like this, the UK eliminating or abolishing or whatever they did with slavery was because they didn't have a choice. They weren't doing us a favor. And for crying out loud, it was something you started. Of course you should end it. You didn't do us a favor by ending it. I will never understand why they keep using that to justify what they did.
100%. Yeah. And so, yeah, a couple of things too, right? So the first thing I saw when I saw this, right? So I'm listening to the guy, I went to his YouTube channel, and, I'm not going to give you guys his name or his YouTube channel so you guys can go give him more views. His stance is taxpayer dollars, right? Why should trillions in taxpayer dollars be given to countries that don't deserve it, right? So a couple of things. Number one, trillions in taxpayer dollars go to the royal family. So maybe you just use the royal family's money, since the royal family was mostly in charge during when the transatlantic slave trade was happening. So maybe it should come from the money they collect, right? Maybe it doesn't need to come from new taxpayer dollars. It can come from them, because they were the ones that were the perpetrators of this. That's maybe one way to solve that challenge. One of the other things I think makes sense too is, or one of the other things I think he said it doesn't make sense, is he also said that, as your point, we were the first to abolish the slave trade. They mention this on many occasions when they want to absolve themselves of any wrongdoing, is to say, well, we were the first to, and we spent many months fighting other ships that were continuing to do it. They'll even mention the fact that they founded Freetown in Sierra Leone and things like that, and gave land to freed slaves. Yeah, I mean, look, if I rob your house of everything in it, and then I come back and dust off one of the baseboards later on, does that absolve me from stealing everything in your house because I came in and dusted the baseboards? You did not really. What you did does not absolve you from what you did previously, and what you did does not solve for what you did previously. The example I wanted to use something that big, because stealing everything in a house and coming and dusting the baseboards is the equivalent to taking people from a nation for many years, continuing to in fact, what I should say is I took the house from you, squatted in the house, and then dusted the baseboards, because really what they're doing is they're continuing to take from the continent of Africa. So it's not even just the case that they abolished slavery first, fine. And they did do some work to fight against some of the folks who continue to perpetuate it, but they started it. They made it as big as it was. And then they continue to have their hands in countries around the continent and the Caribbean, even after they abolished the slave trade, and even after they, quote unquote, gave back their independence. So, I think that these are all, false equivalencies and arguments that are being made that make absolutely no sense. And the thing that makes the most challenging thing for me is someone who is an immigrant to a country, fighting to get rid of immigrants, and also using this as a way to basically say, the UK has been smacked around. We don't have any strength anymore. I think the UK doesn't have strength anymore because it spent all its money focusing and diversifying its interests around the world in other people's places, and even extracting resources, but not really focusing on building the country that they have themselves. Couple of quick comments we want to get to. If they do that, I hope our leaders, especially in Ghana, then reconsider the security deal they just signed. We need some Ibrahim Traore energy. Considering the damage that Britain caused to the African continent, it's the least they owe them. This is the reparations comment. Yes, of course. Middle East still in the slave trade. That is a point that many people often make. And, there are specific countries that are accused of this today, and even proxy wars as well. We've covered that on many occasions. They had a choice.
I can't wait to respond, but keep going, Joe.
I totally say it too. True. UK ended the slave trade, split a lot of blood over it. So this is someone who's on the side of the UK. Is that what?
We're ungrateful, so we need to be thankful. So
you're saying we're ungrateful? Well,
yeah.
Oh, please, Gloria, if you have some thoughts, I'd love for you. There's more. There's more from this individual, and others. So there's a couple of comments. They ended slavery in the West. Lady just wants money. Okay, they abolish the slave trade in Jamaica, then compensate the owners for their losses from the abolition of the trade. That is true. So one of the things that is really important to mention is that, yes, many of the slave owners were given money. There's a lot here. Russia and China stealing your resources. Yeah, I mean, look, two things can be true. The European banks quit robbing Africa already. Right.
May I please?
Yeah,
go.
please. Yeah.
When you finish, it's like I couldn't wait.
There's an onslaught of comments. So I just wanted to get to some of these comments. So Gloria, I think you had some responses to the individual that was saying that the Africans in the Caribbean are ungrateful for the abolition of the slave trade.
Yeah,
So,
and
okay, ungrateful. Please, your thoughts.
And it wasn't just that one person. There, I've seen, I think, 2 or 3 people basically on this. So here's the thing. Every time we have these conversations, you want to go to the Arab slave trade. I understand it. Like Joe said, 2 things can be true. Matter of fact, I'm saying many things can be true at the same time. And every time we come to you with this history, the least you can do is acknowledge the people who did what they did to the African people were compensated. But you miss all that and you insist that we should focus on the Arabs. Who told you we're not holding them accountable too? Have you seen what's going on with Dubai, Sudan, and it's not even just that. We've gone even before that. We've gone beyond all that. So every time we bring these conversations up, we always get hit with those rhetorics, but it's a new day. We're not buying it. With all due respect, please, we are pushing. It's not about, you're saying this lady wants money. Oh, I wish. We're pushing for justice for people who were treated so horribly and justice was not served. Had these countries, even the UK that's crying about immigration today, are you aware that Nigeria and Jamaica, for instance, are part of the reason the NHS is as successful as it is today? Imagine what would happen. So now you're trying to punish people, students, tourists who are trying to come into England. You're going to punish them a second time. You've punished them back then in history. You're going to punish them. You're going to keep punishing them for something that your people did. So at the end of the day, this is about making things right. Systemically, things are still going on. The UK is still very much involved on the continent of Africa, for instance. The UK is still very much involved in Caribbean nations. So you're not even necessarily trying to stop. The first step is to stop digging, for us to keep, to stop going into this ditch. Your governments are not even trying to stop. Had they even stopped, the conversation may not have been as heavy, but we still need a lot of justice, and that's where we're coming from. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I'll just add to that. Look, address the topic at hand. Don't address other topics, right? Other things that are happening on the continent are also things, as Gloria said, we do focus on. Today, we are talking about the UK and a proposed ban on visas from Africa. So that is what we are focused on today. So let's focus on that today. Those of you who are in the comments talking about other things, let's focus on that. We will focus on those other things when those conversations come up, as we have in the past. I think this is a common tactic with people who want to whitewash and or agree with atrocities that have happened to a group of people, is to point to another atrocity so that you can say, look, watch over here, don't watch over here. No, we're still watching over here. We know what happened. We know what happened over here. We know what happened over here, but we're talking about this right now. And so for those of you who are asking us to look elsewhere, let's first focus on the thing that we're here to talk about. We can talk about other things as well. But, so number one, let me just recap it. This party is not the political party in power technically today. Nigel Farage and the gentleman that you saw in the video, who is not Nigel Farage, or someone else who is the child of immigrants, they are looking to come to power in the next election. They also do have seats in parliament, from what I understand. So what they are proposing can actually be passed if the government that's in power today decides to pass it. And I don't know what the process is in the UK, so don't get me to speaking to the specifics, but it's proposed, so it can pass. What I think these gentlemen are saying is this is going to be one of the things they run on as the next election comes up, and they will likely propose this if and when they do end up in power in the UK. So we will pay close attention to this. I'm glad so many people have so many thoughts. It's obviously struck a nerve with certain people where where it's interesting that there are people who really want to try hard to cape for the European governments that that enacted many of these atrocities throughout history. And I think it's really interesting. But we are just reporting on what is happening. Question that Jada just had is, didn't they just return Patrice Lumumba's tooth? The history wasn't too long ago. That is correct, Jada. You got that right. So this is not the topic of today's discussion, but we've talked about this before. So why is no one talking about it? Because that had nothing to do with what happened today. That had nothing to do with what the UK. If the UK had something, if Saudi Arabia said something, then we would be talking about this. Or, you know, I would say more specifically if another group, because right now the current countries as they stand today, it's kind of hard to do it the same way because the countries are different than the countries back then. It was groups of people back then. But yes, if a specific country was to propose something like that, and that was the news of the week, that's what we would be talking about. That is not the news of the week. The news of the week is in the UK. So we're talking about what happened in the UK. Clear? Hope that makes sense to everybody watching. Okay. So moving on to the Global Terrorism Index. Yes, we are. But specifically to Nigeria. So one of the things that you know, Gloria and I had talked about this a bit, you know, the what's happening in the north with the insurgents in Nigeria. So you know, there are boots on the ground, there are drones on the ground. The presence of the U.S. military in Nigeria hasn't seemed to have the level of impact that those who supported this in Nigeria and those who supported this in the United States anticipated. You know, an army general was unalived in an attack on a military base in Borno State last week. Obviously, as I mentioned, American forces are on the ground in Nigeria. There's American drones that are operating, and still this keeps happening. So I want to get to a video that speaks to what happened, and I would love to we'll have some commentary on the other side. I think it's going to be really important for you guys to hear what just happened, and we want to hear from the audience and hear from you guys as to what you guys think, because you know, this was one of those stories that it should be shocking to those. If there are people there to help with this, then why is this still happening? So I will press play, and we will have some commentary on the other side. Sorry, give me a second.
6 years ago, Ali Tabsoba fled to Pazani village in the outskirts of Burkina Faso's capital.
Sorry, wrong video. I'm trying to play the video and it's not playing the right video. Sorry about that. So let me give some feedback. So do you want to give some context to this story while I'm working on the video? It looks like the wrong video was pulled up. Gloria, do you have some thoughts? You want to give some context before we get into the video, and then we'll get to it? Let me just pull it up really quickly while we do that.
Sure. So there was an overnight attack on a military base in Borno State. It actually has been all over the news in Nigeria. And the reason that has happened is because you had a brigadier general being unalived, and there were at least 18 soldiers that were also unalived. And that just obviously is big news because it's a major blow to the military's command structure in the northeast of Nigeria. And that's actually, it's been a very vulnerable transit point in history. And we've had high-level military casualties, which is just really sad. And the reason, and you can stop me at any point, Joe, so I don't preempt.
Yeah, well, yeah, we could jump into the video and then we can give some more context afterwards. I finally got the video up. Sorry about that, guys, but let us play this video and then we'll give some more commentary and some context afterwards.
Where an army general and several soldiers have been killed in an overnight jihadist attack on a military base in the northeast of the country, highlighting a surge in militant violence targeting security forces. The army said the attack took place in Benin in Borno State, and that troops eventually repelled the assailants. In a statement, the military described the attackers as terrorists, the term it uses for Islamic militant groups. Now, this happened amid wider violence across northern Nigeria, with at least 90 civilians killed in recent days by jihadists and armed gangs. Let's go to our bureau chief, Amaka Okoya in Lagos. Welcome, Amaka. Bring us up to speed then with what happened with this attack in Borno and the significance of the killing of this Brigadier General.
I think that this is one of the strongest attacks that we have seen, one of those that you can describe as an assault to the Nigerian state, an assault also to the military, because, I mean, yes, it's an overnight attack. It was the military base that was also attacked. And if we just put it in context, especially for our global audience, this is just 75 kilometers away from the state capital, where these terrorists, armed terrorists obviously went in and killed, dozens of soldiers and a very senior official there, who is the brigadier.
All right, we'll leave it there. The video is quite long. If you guys want to watch it, you can. Your thoughts, if you want to complete what you were saying, and your thoughts on this story.
Yes. So now to focus on what the U.S. is really doing in Nigeria is just, the irony is just, I mean, we all know Trump was in the news just screaming about all this stuff going on in Nigeria to Christians. And when push came to shove, it's like, okay, bro, now you have the access you've been wanting. And a lot of people spoke against, giving America this access. Well, you're now there, your boots are on the ground. It's just so ironic because you're an administration that was famously vocal about ending forever wars, and you were prioritizing America first. But now you've increased your military footprint in Nigeria. What is the reason you're there? You're there. A lot of people say you were there for the resources. That's what the people said. And now it's like, okay, now are you just quietly chilling in the background? Things have happened since you've been there. Almost every time we come on this live now, we're talking about something happening in Nigeria. We talked about Jos in Plateau State just a few weeks ago. So what exactly is the job of the United States right now? I think that's the big question. What exactly are you there for? I assume, let's even say the Nigerian government doesn't have intelligence on the scale that you have. I assume that you have enough intelligence. What are you there for? These are people, as I have pointed time and time again, these are people who, as far as I'm concerned, you see them on social media. The digital footprints are there. They come out and they even give warnings about what they're going to do to the people. There's intel. So what exactly is the role of America right now? And why is Trump quiet?
100%, right? I mean, we reported on this on many occasions, right? The interest that Turning Point USA and the right-leaning members of the United States were discussing the unaliving of Christians, right? And that was the reason they were there. And as we said many times on this live stream, that we understand that the most important thing is that people are losing their lives, right? We shouldn't be arguing over who is the target, the intended target, and is this a religious war? I mean, these are people who are, bastardizing and changing the meaning of a religion to be able to execute other people, right? That's the most important thing. And then the next story on top of that is the United States saying that they wanted to be involved in order to stop this from happening to a group of people that they align with religiously. However, when we get to the actual execution of stopping this, we find that, as we've seen throughout the Sahel, as we've seen throughout West Africa, the troops on the ground and the drones and the intelligence has not done much to slow down or stop the funding, the continued radicalization, and the expansion of land, let alone the unalivings of innocent people by these jihadist groups. In fact, it seems like they're growing and continue to grow as we add more Western troops.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel or seem like much happens to solve this problem. And I think this is the problem that we were all speaking to when we first heard that, boots were going to be on the ground, drones were going to be there. the question that everybody had is, why is the US there if this isn't working? And are they going to have the impact that they are saying they're going to have publicly? You know, you know, you can make up your own assumptions as to why the US is there in terms of its proximity to the Sahel, how there is no more US troops in the Sahel. You know, there are a lot of people why they have reasons to believe why the US is there, and they think it has nothing to do with dealing with Boko Haram and the jihadist or militant groups in the north of Nigeria. You make your own determinations by watching these stories, and you determine yourself as you guys are watching. So there's a lot of comments here, and don't have time to get to all of them because we're already 31 minutes in because we spent so much time on the first story. But you know, like the main sentiment is that people are arguing over what the war is about, right? And it really is insurgents. It's not a war. It's insurgents that are attacking innocent civilians. And sometimes the government military attacks back. Sometimes. That's really what it comes down to. We can ask ourselves why, how the funding's getting there, all those kinds of questions, but that's what we do know. All right, so now moving on to the next story, speaking to a country to the northeast of Nigeria, bordering directly on the country of Ghana, and we're talking about Burkina Faso and Ibrahim Traore. So Sub-Saharan Africa remains the global epicenter of terrorism, according to CGTN Africa. They say it accounts for more than half of all terrorism-related unalivings for the third straight year in 2025, according to the Global Terrorism Index. However, they're mentioning some countries, including Burkina Faso, have recently recorded a decline in attacks and fatalities, signaling a potential shift in the security landscape despite years of escalating violence. So we are going to play a little bit of this story, and then we will have some commentary on the other side.
Capital Ouagadougou, his hometown in the northern region.
Sorry, let me start this over.
6 years ago, Ali Tabsoba fled to Pazani village in the outskirts of Burkina Faso's capital, Ouagadougou. His hometown in the northern region had been the target of several terrorist attacks.
The first time, they stormed the market, setting fire to about 10 motorbikes. After that, they returned to attack the church, killing the pastor and 5 of his congregation. 6 months later, the last attack was on the day of Ramadan. They killed the imam and 13 worshippers. When we saw that the attacks were becoming a regular occurrence, we decided to leave the village.
Although Tabsoba has been longing to return home, he remains worried about the security situation there.
It is difficult for civilians to travel more than 10 kilometers from the town, except for the army. Now we can say that the situation has improved. There are fewer attacks in the town, but we cannot simply return. The area is still under threat.
Burkina Faso has faced an escalating security crisis driven by terrorism for over a decade. Jinim, which is linked to Al-Qaeda, remains the most dominant militant group. In 2024, Burkina Faso was ranked as the country most impacted by terrorism for the second consecutive year by the Global Terrorism Index, and Jinim was responsible for nearly half of all attacks during this period. However, the nation is now experiencing a shift in the security landscape. According to a new report, it recorded a 45% drop in terrorism-related deaths in 2025. This has been attributed to a new strategy which prioritizes military force and territorial reclamation over dialogue.
Today, when we talk about the Burkinabe army, it's not like it used to be before. We now have an army that goes out to hunt down terrorists. We are on the offensive, but before we used to wait for the terrorists to come to us. Secondly, with the equipment that we have and the new organization led by the president of Burkina Faso, Captain Traore and his team, we can see today that this army is growing in strength. It is no longer just an empty phrase, it is a reality.
All right, so, you know, obviously there's clearly been a shift in policy and outcomes in Burkina Faso. Interesting, because you see a difference in what we're talking about, 40+% reduction in Burkina Faso versus what we have been seeing in Nigeria. And let's compare that to who is in country, right? You guys might remember we reported on This Week in Africa maybe about 2 years ago that Burkina Faso kicked out all Western troops. They kicked out France, UK, US, and a few others, as did Niger and as did Mali. They did decide to strengthen ties with the East, in many cases with Russia, and share with intelligence, etc. So you see that there's an obvious shift. Gloria, your thoughts on this report, 40+% reduction, and the people on the ground saying that he's doing what he claimed he was going to do.
Sorry to distract you without
Sure.
popping up. At Lion Champion S87 is echoing precisely what I was going to speak to. The coordinated media campaign against Traore. And yeah, so the reason I'm speaking to this is because we've said this time and time again, and I'm very happy that a lot of people are understanding this conversation and seeing the direction that we should be going in terms of what we say. Not too long ago, we reported a story and people were like, no, that's fake news. You shouldn't have. What we were just doing was covering it. A story that, by the way, even African media outlets that are not West affiliated actually did cover. But I think the big takeaway here is, see, when we have reports like this Human Rights Watch report that was being mentioned, when we have reports that go against what we're talking about today, which is that the unaliving is increasing in the Sahel, we have those reports. And on the other hand, we have the reports from Burkina Faso. So my big concern with these stories, when people come out with these very negative stories that have to do with really any part of Africa, especially a leader who has chosen to fight for the sovereignty of his nation and his people, especially considering what has happened throughout their history. When we have, them being targeted by the media, by the West, it's concerning. And this is why people are unable to receive whatever news you put out, whether or not they're true, because it seems that you're only waiting for the negative stories, or you're only cooking up negativity around these countries. But let them report their own stories. Let them tell their own stories, because you have chosen not to tell their stories properly. As I've said time and time again, your job is to report the news. You don't ever come out when they're making strides, when great things are happening in the Sahel. You don't ever talk about it. But when it's about negativity, then you're there headlining the stories. So if you're not going to be balanced in your reporting, please just leave our stories alone and we will keep telling them. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I'll just say to that point that was being made, because we're not going to have time to play a video on this, but yes, the Human Rights Watch did basically say that the forces in Burkina Faso have been committing crimes against humanity, saying that there's been 1,800 civilians that were unalive between 2023 and 2025. Many of those linked to what they call government forces and allied militias. And so, it's interesting, right? Because you have people on the ground being very specific in saying that the military has done the right thing. And you have these Human Rights Watch and others who generally have been, many people have looked at to be the ones to tell you the truth about what's happening in the country, saying that there's been increase in civilian unalivings. But then you also see that there was a 40% decrease in terror-related attacks. And so, look, it's night and day the way it's being approached in Burkina Faso and the Sahel versus what you're seeing in the non-Sahelian countries, right? Those folks have been, as stated in this video, doing the same thing that Burkina Faso used to do, right? Under different leadership, where they were waiting for the jihadists to attack and then potentially attack back. You can see that Burkina Faso has done a great job of reducing access. And one of the other things is, funding has to come from somewhere for these jihadists and these military groups. It has to come from somewhere. And how does it get into the country? Through, is it cash? Is it financial transactions? How do these groups continue to grow in other countries, but are shrinking in size in Burkina Faso specifically, and now Mali and Niger have also had great strides towards taking back swaths of land and pushing back these jihadist groups. They've clearly been able to find a way to cut off the funding and slow down the growth, or at least diminish the amount of land and attacks that these jihadist groups have had. And so that leads you to wonder if countries that aren't in the Sahel, what are they doing differently? We've kind of talked about that already, but you see that the attacks are increasing in other places, but decreasing in the Sahel. And instead of reporting on those things, as Gloria mentioned, what these groups are reporting on is unconfirmed increases in potential civilian loss of life, and not really reporting on the loss of territory by the jihadists because of what Traoré has done. And the last thing I'll just say is, this is the reason why you have military leaders in these countries, and why many people on the continent are looking for military leaders, because they seem to be the ones, at least in the Sahel, to be getting results. The results aren't coming to those who are Western aligned and are, you know, operating the way the West does. And so when you only have those two options in front of people, they seem to they're self-selecting this option.
Yeah.
All right. So with that being said, I want to move on to France and their interest across the continent. A couple things here. So as mentioned previously, as I was going through the stories, there's resource wars happening across the continent everywhere, right? There are proxy wars. There are those who are in the legitimate business, but with, you know, terrible business terms. But let's be specific. After being pushed out of the Sahel, France isn't going without its uranium, because it was pushed out of Niger. Niger has had a very significant uranium deposits, and France was benefiting greatly from that. In fact, many people would say the entire country of France is powered by the uranium it was getting from Niger for all those years. So this week, reports confirmed that France is looking to Botswana to replace what it lost when Niger kicked them out. So the resource game doesn't stop. They just continue to keep looking for more resources. So they're facing a growing uranium challenges after losing their supplies to, the supplies in Niger following the 2023 takeover. So nearly 70% of France's electricity is dependent on nuclear power, and nuclear power is enriched with uranium. So now they're looking to Botswana. So we're going to play a video, and we'll have some commentary on the other side.
And France is facing a uranium crunch. For decades, its nuclear power was fed by Niger, but after being pushed out of Niamey in 2023, Paris is now scrambling for a replacement, and its next bet is Botswana. Botswana is the world's largest diamond producer, but beneath the surface, it also has some of the largest uranium reserves in Africa, with an estimated 800,000 tons of untapped uranium. At the center of that is the Letlhakane deposit in the western part of the country. It is one of the largest undeveloped uranium resources in the world, but it is not the only source of untapped uranium in the country. Now, reports say that Orano, a major French state-backed company, has secured exploration licenses in Botswana's Ganzi district, covering roughly 15,000 square kilometers.
All right, so we'll leave it there. Gloria, your thoughts on France move to Botswana after being kicked out of Niger?
Thank you. And Joe, please remind me before we wrap up to share breaking news on Julius Malema before we wrap up. Just to put out the headline.
Sure.
Yeah, very important story. Okay, so France. You know, when you announced it, I don't know if you saw the expression on my face, like, oh no, surprise, France is really still trying to strategize. I mean, obviously, the historical trigger, we all know it. This was based on what happened in July 2023 in Niger. And we also know that there's been a nationalization of a mine Uranium, which, France actually held a 63.4% stake in. So France is desperately trying to find where it can, plant its flag, as it were. And we also know the economic impact of France being kicked out of Africa. We know what that has exposed. And that's why when people say justice isn't necessary and we should move on, oh, no. We're going to keep talking about it till justice is served. The bottom line is that Africa has served France for many years. And we know what France has done to Africa. We know what France has done to our leaders. So we know that Niger actually provided 20% of the uranium that was needed to power France's nuclear fleet. And we know that Niger basically, in essence, was providing 70% of France's electricity. So there's a lot of loss for France because they've been kicked out basically from the Sahel. And that's why when you see people rallying around the Traorés of this world, there is a reason. But anyway, enter Botswana. Botswana is primarily known for its diamond industry. Botswana is estimated to hold roughly 800,000 tons of uranium reserves. So Botswana also has uranium, and they will have a deposit that is considered one of the largest undeveloped resources in the world. So now France, through Uranium, is, it's secured exploration licenses in Botswana. And this is actually France's largest African exploration commitment in decades. So basically, France is seeing Botswana as a long-term strategic replacement for, what's happened in the Sahel. So France needs Africa so desperately. And unlike Niger, which has been a producer of uranium since the 1970s, Botswana is not yet producing processed uranium. So it's going to take years, obviously, for them to develop the necessary infrastructure. But what I will say to Botswana, I have always rooted for you. But please know that these are colonial era extraction models that have fueled anti-French sentiment in Africa. There is a reason people are kicking France out of the continent. Please, you cannot keep fueling something. We're asking for justice, but our leaders also need to do better. You need to know better. Learn from Niger, learn from the Sahel, learn from countries throughout Africa that have been done wrong for France. If anything, just for the dignity of our land, we have to make better decisions. And if you're thinking we need this partnership so desperately, no, they need us and they know why. And that's why they keep coming back.
Absolutely. And to give some people more context, Uranium Mining was a company, a French state-owned nuclear giant. They were in Niger for over 50 years. And when Niger forced them out, Niger took that. Uranium had 63% controlling stake in a couple of different mines or specifically one specific mine, the Somer mine in Niger. And when Niger nationalized that mine, they took that 63.4% controlling stake back. And so Uranium is now looking to other countries, specifically, like you said, Botswana. And, as you mentioned, there's going to be some time before this gets off the ground, and we hope that Botswana reconsiders, at least just thinks it through a bit. I don't have all the details of the deal, but obviously, every country is looking for a way to make money off their natural resources. We understand that, but just think about what France did in the Sahel, and we just hope that doesn't happen in Botswana. All right. So with that, we are running low on time. There was an update from Malema in South Africa. Julius Malema was in South African court the last couple of days. You had a story that you wanted to bring, breaking news. Please share that breaking news.
Yes. So he's been sentenced to 5 years in prison, basically for firing. I'm trying to be careful of how I phrase this, but basically for firing a firearm in the air at a rally, for those who missed the story. And this could actually bar him from Parliament. But I can't wait for us to discuss this further next week. But just keep that in mind that Malema has been sentenced to prison for 5 years.
Yep, effective 5 years of direct imprisonment for unlawful possession of a firearm. Interesting, because he just had won a case before for I think it was like hate speech or something to that effect. But now it looks like he may be serving time. You know, obviously he's been a firebrand and someone prior to, you know, the rise of the Sahel. Malema was one of those voices on the continent that people really look towards. Doesn't look like he was ever going to win the presidency of South Africa. I think he's even recently said that, but people had a lot of hopes for that. And he was actually, interestingly enough, at one point in time in 2023, I looked at Google searches and he was Google searched more than Ramaphosa, who is the current president of South Africa. But it seems like Malema has lost his steam on a national stage as folks who are actually in power, making changes in power, have continued to kind of take the spotlight for the continent of Africa, specifically in the Sahel. So we will cover that story more in detail next week. But I'm glad you brought that to this group. So stay tuned. Next week we will have more on the 5-year sentence of Malema and what that means for the economic freedom fighters of South Africa and their movements. Without its leader, there are going to be some questions as to whether or not they're going to be a viable political party or a movement within the country. All right, we are basically at time. I know there were more. Did you have something more? Please go ahead.
No, I just want to say this was such a great session. I love the arguments for and against all the things we've discussed. This was absolutely wonderful. Thank you all so much.
Absolutely. You guys flooded the comments today. It's a very highly attended live stream, one of the more attended live streams that we've seen for a while. So thank you guys all for your participation. As I always mention, I now have the Africa Insights newsletter that I am going to be doing weekly, and right now we're just sharing what live streams you've missed, but there will be new insights from around the continent. And then, as we talked about previously, there is going to be a paywall. So there will be specific stuff that we cannot post publicly on public platforms. So pay attention to that. That'll be coming soon in the next couple of weeks. In the meantime, make sure you follow us on all platforms. Thank you for watching, Josie. I'm glad you found this chat informative. Make sure you follow Diaspora Station and also the Gloria Ayo on all the platforms, and then follow Authentic African across all platforms. And stay tuned, because we're going to have these live streams every week, or as much as we can, except for on weeks where I have to travel. And we will be doing other live streams on Ghana. Next Monday, we got This Week in Ghana. And this coming Sunday, we have This Week in Sierra Leone. So if you want specifics on those two countries, because as you know, I rep Sierra Leone every day. So we have specifics on Ghana and Sierra Leone. This coming Sunday, this coming next Monday, we'll be discussing Ghana, Sierra Leone, and Ghana respectively. And then, of course, stay tuned every Thursday where we talk about the full continent. Excellent video. Y'all got a new subscriber. Appreciate you. Thank you for the subscription. And with that, thank you for watching. We'll see you guys all next week. Bye, guys.